The alarm sounded through the cargo ship at 3 in the morning. Minji woke up fast, her heart pounding as she ran to the control room. The lights were flashing red and yellow across all the screens. Something was wrong out there in the dark space. Daeho was already at his station, his fingers moving quickly over the controls. He looked tired and worried. "Captain, we've got a distress signal. It's coming from about 2 hours away if we change course now." Minji rubbed her eyes and looked at the screen. The signal was weak, breaking up every few seconds, but it was definitely there. Someone needed help. She checked their current route. They were carrying medical supplies to the colony on Titan 7, and they were already running behind schedule. "What kind of ship is it?" she asked. Daeho worked on his computer for a moment. "It's Valrine, a small research vessel from what I can tell. The signal is automated, which usually means the crew can't send it themselves anymore." Minji felt her stomach twist. The Valrine were cat-like aliens who kept to themselves mostly. They were smart. Very smart. And they didn't usually ask for help unless things were really bad. If their automated system was calling for rescue, it meant something terrible had happened. Juan walked into the control room, still wearing his sleep clothes. He was their engineer, and he could fix almost anything on the ship. "What's going on? Why are we stopped?" "Distress call," Minji said simply. She was thinking hard. If they went to help, they would be late delivering their cargo. The company would be angry. They might not pay the full amount. Money was already tight this month. But if they didn't go, someone might die out there in the cold darkness of space. "How far off course?" she asked Daeho. 2 weeks. Maybe more if the rescue is complicated. 2 weeks. That was a lot of time. A lot of money lost. Minji looked at her crew. Juan was watching her quietly, waiting. Daeho had his hand on the controls, ready to move if she gave the order. "Change course," Minji said finally. "We can't just leave them out there." Juan nodded slowly. "I'll prep the rescue equipment." Daeho started turning the ship. "Course locked. We'll be there in 1 hour and 43 minutes. Minji sat in her captain's chair and stared out at the stars. She hoped they would get there in time. She hoped whoever was on that ship was still alive. The next 2 hours felt very long. Minji drank 3 cups of coffee and checked their supplies. They had emergency medical kits, spare oxygen tanks, and repair tools. Whatever they found, they would try to help. When they finally got close to the Valrine ship, Minji felt her heart sink. The vessel was broken badly. One whole side was crushed inward, and there was a big hole in the hull. Pieces of metal floated around it like sad confetti. Something had hit it hard, probably an asteroid or space debris. "Life signs?" Minji asked quietly. Daeho scanned the wreck carefully. He frowned at his screen. "I'm getting something. 3 signals, very weak. They're in the cargo bay area. That part of the ship still has some air and heat. 3 survivors," Juan said. "That's good news at least." But Minji was looking at the scan more carefully. "Those life signs are small. Too small for adult Valrine." Daeho checked again. His face went pale. "You're right. Captain, I think those are children. Cubs." The word hung in the air between them. Cubs. Baby Valrine, alone on a dying ship. Minji stood up fast. "Juan, suit up. We're going over there right now." They put on their spacesuits and checked each other's seals. Everything had to be perfect in space. One small mistake could kill you. Minji grabbed the medical kit and some emergency blankets. They flew across the empty space between the 2 ships using their suit jets. The inside of the Valrine ship was dark and cold. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, showing walls covered in ice and frost. The ship's power was almost gone. They moved carefully through the broken hallways, following Daeho's directions from the main ship. "The cargo bay is just ahead." Daeho's voice crackled in their helmets. "Life signs are still there." Minji pushed open the cargo bay door. It was stuck at first, but Juan helped her force it. Inside, they found a small area that still had some heat and air. And there, huddled in the corner behind some boxes, were 3 small shapes. 3 Valrine cubs stared at them with huge, frightened eyes. They were tiny, covered in soft gray and white fur that was dirty and matted. Their ears were flat against their heads and they were shaking. One of them hissed when Minji took a step closer. "It's okay," Minji said softly, even though she knew they probably couldn't understand her. "We're here to help." "We're not going to hurt you." She looked around the cargo bay. There were 2 adult Valrine lying near the wall. They weren't moving. Minji checked them quickly and shook her head at Juan. They were gone. These cubs were orphans now. The smallest cub started making a crying sound, high and sad. It broke Minji's heart. She moved very slowly, keeping her hands where they could see them. "We need to take you to our ship. It's warm there. And safe." One of the cubs, slightly bigger than the others, took a small step forward. It sniffed the air, trying to smell them through their helmets. Minji held out her gloved hand. After a long moment, the cub touched it with one small paw. "Good," Minji whispered. "That's good. Come on, little one. Bring your friends." It took almost an hour to get all 3 cubs to trust them enough to move. They were scared and confused and probably didn't understand what had happened to their guardians. But finally, wrapped in emergency blankets, the 3 cubs were brought aboard the Stellar Wind. Minji took off her helmet and looked at the 3 small aliens sitting on her cargo bay floor. They looked so lost and afraid. She had no idea how to take care of baby Valrine. She didn't know what they ate or needed or how to make them feel safe, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to leave them alone. Not now, not ever. "Deho, set course for the nearest Valrine colony station," she said into her communicator. "That's Epsilon Station. 2 weeks away. 2 weeks with 3 scared alien children." Minji looked at them and smiled gently. "We can do this," she said, trying to sound confident. She had no idea how wrong she was about to be. The first sign of trouble came exactly 3 hours after the cubs came aboard. Minji was in the control room trying to figure out the new course and how much the rescue would cost them, when she heard a loud ripping sound from down the hall. Then another. Then what sounded like someone tearing cloth apart with their bare hands. She ran to the crew quarters and stopped in the doorway. Her mouth fell open. The 3 cubs were in the middle of the room, surrounded by white fluff. They had torn apart 2 pillows completely. Feathers and foam were everywhere, covering the floor like snow. The cubs were digging through the pieces, their little claws working fast. One of them, the smallest with gray spots, had stuffing stuck to her face. She looked up at Minji and made a small chirping sound, then went back to shredding. "No, no, no," Minji said, rushing forward. "Stop that. Those are our pillows," but the cubs didn't stop. They didn't even seem to hear her. The biggest one grabbed another pillow from Deho's bed and bit down hard. His sharp little teeth punched right through the fabric. He shook his head back and forth and more stuffing flew into the air. Minji tried to take the pillow away, but the cub held on tight. He made a growling sound low in his throat. It wasn't a mean sound exactly, but it was definitely a warning. Minji let go, not wanting to scare him or get bitten. "Okay," she said, backing up slowly. "Okay, you can have the pillow." She left the room and sealed the door behind her. Through the small window, she watched the cubs continue their destruction. They were making a pile of all the soft material in the center of the room, pushing it together with their paws. It looked almost like they were trying to build something, but she couldn't figure out what. Juan found her there 10 minutes later. He took one look through the window and his face went red. "That's my sleeping bag. I brought that from Earth. It was a gift from my brother." Inside the room, the middle cub was happily tearing the sleeping bag into long strips. The special thermal material that had cost Juan 3 months of salary was now just garbage scattered across the floor. "I'm sorry," Minji said quietly. "I didn't know they would do this. Well, stop them." "I tried. They won't listen." Juan pushed past her and opened the door. He marched into the room with his arms waving. "Hey, Bad. Stop that right now." All 3 cubs looked at him. Then the smallest one hissed, showing tiny, sharp teeth. Juan stopped moving. The cubs went back to their work, ignoring him completely. Juan came back out of the room looking less angry and more confused. "What are they doing?" "I don't know," Minji admitted. "But we need to figure it out fast or they're going to destroy everything soft on this ship." She was right. Over the next 2 days, the situation got worse. Much worse. The cubs seemed to have a mission. They found every pillow, every blanket, every piece of soft fabric on the ship and destroyed it. Deho tried locking things in the storage closets, but somehow the cubs figured out how to open the doors. They were small, but they were smart and determined. Minji spent hours reading everything she could find about Valrine biology in the ship's computer database. Most of it was basic information about adult Valrine and their culture. There wasn't much about cubs, but she found one file that mentioned something called nesting behavior. According to the file, young Valrine had an instinct to create safe sleeping spaces. In the wild, their ancestors would tear apart plants and soft materials to build nests in caves or hollow trees. Modern Valrine cubs usually did this in special nursery rooms designed for it, with materials that were meant to be shredded, but these cubs didn't have a nursery. They just had a human cargo ship full of things that weren't supposed to be torn apart. "They're not being bad," Minji explained to her crew that night. "They're scared. They're trying to make themselves feel safe." "Well, they're doing a terrible job," Juan muttered. He was sleeping on a bare mattress now because all his blankets were gone, and making us feel very unsafe about our belongings. Deho had tried to build barriers around the cubs, creating a small enclosed space in the cargo bay where they couldn't reach anything important. But the cubs were amazing climbers. They could jump almost as high as Minji's shoulders, and they could squeeze through gaps that looked too small for them. Within hours, they had escaped and found the command chair cushions. By the fourth day, everyone was exhausted. The ship looked like a disaster had hit it. There was fluff and torn fabric everywhere. The crew was sleeping on hard surfaces without any comfort. And the cubs were still scared and unhappy, crying at night with sounds that made Minji want to cry too. She tried everything she could think of. She offered them synthetic materials from the repair kit, but they sniffed it and walked away. She tried playing with them, hoping to tire them out, but they only played for a few minutes before going back to looking for soft things to destroy. She even tried showing them videos of adult Valrine, hoping they would calm down, but they just stared at the screen with confused expressions. Nothing worked. On the fifth night, Minji sat in the control room alone. Juan and Deho were both sleeping or trying to sleep in their beds. The ship was quiet except for the soft sounds of the cubs moving around in the cargo bay. They weren't destroying anything right now. They were just crying, those same sad sounds that broke Minji's heart every time she heard them. She put her head in her hands and tried not to cry herself. She wanted to help them so badly. She wanted to make them feel safe and loved. But she didn't know how. She wasn't Valrine. She didn't understand what they needed. Her communicator beeped. It was Deho. "Captain, I hate to bother you, but I think you should come to the cargo bay." Minji's heart jumped. "Are they okay? Are they hurt?" "No, they're fine. Just come see." She ran to the cargo bay and looked through the door window. The three cubs were huddled together in the corner, sitting on top of a huge pile of all the materials they had shredded over the past few days. They had pushed it all together into one big mound, but they weren't sleeping on it or in it. They were just sitting there, shaking and crying softly. "They built their nest," Deho said quietly beside her, "but it's not working. They're still scared." Minji watched them through the window and suddenly she understood. The cubs weren't just making a nest. They were looking for something more, something the pile of destroyed pillows and blankets couldn't give them. They were looking for someone who smelled safe, someone who felt like home, someone who would protect them. They were looking for a parent, and Minji had no idea how to be that for them. She was just a human cargo ship captain who was trying her best. But her best wasn't enough. She watched the cubs cry themselves to exhaustion, and she felt more helpless than she had ever felt in her entire life. Tomorrow, she thought she would have to try something different. She just didn't know what that something was yet. Minji couldn't sleep that night. She lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the cubs crying in the cargo bay. The sound traveled through the walls of the ship, soft but constant. It was the saddest sound she had ever heard. She thought about her own childhood. When she was very small, maybe 4 or 5 years old, she had been scared of the dark. Every night she would cry until her mother came and sat beside her bed. Her mother would stroke her hair and sing old Korean songs until Minji fell asleep. It wasn't the words that helped. It was knowing someone was there, someone who smelled familiar and felt safe. These cubs had lost that. Their guardians were gone. They were alone on a strange ship with strange creatures who didn't smell right or sound right or act right. No wonder they were scared. No wonder nothing was working. Minji sat up in bed. She had one idea left. It was probably a stupid idea. It definitely went against protocol about maintaining professional distance from rescue subjects. But she had to try something. She got out of bed and walked to her small locker. Inside, pushed to the very back, was her pillow from home. It was the only one left on the entire ship. She had hidden it on the first day, not wanting to lose the one thing that still smelled like Earth, like her old apartment, like home. The pillow was old and flat. The fabric was soft from years of use, and there was a small stain on one corner from where she had spilled tea 6 months ago. It wasn't much to look at, but it was hers, and it smelled like her. And maybe that would mean something to the cubs. She tucked the pillow under her arm and walked to the cargo bay. The door opened with a soft hiss. Inside, the 3 cubs were exactly where she had last seen them, huddled on their pile of destroyed materials. Their eyes glowed in the dim light, reflecting her flashlight like tiny moons. Minji sat down on the cold metal floor about 2 meters away from them. She didn't want to scare them by getting too close. She placed the pillow on the floor in front of her and pushed it gently toward them. "Here," she said softly in Korean. She didn't think they understood, but her tone was gentle and calm. "This is mine. I've had it for a long time. Maybe it will help." The biggest cub, the one who seemed to be the leader, lifted his head. His ears were still flat against his skull, but he was watching her. Slowly, very slowly, he stood up and took a step toward the pillow, then another step. Then he stopped and sniffed the air. Minji held very still. She barely breathed. She didn't want to do anything that might scare him away. The cub moved closer. He stretched his neck out and sniffed the pillow. His small pink nose twitched. He sniffed it again, more carefully this time. Then he looked up at Minji with his big golden eyes. She smiled at him. "It's okay," she whispered. "You can have it." The cub looked back at the pillow. Then, instead of biting it or tearing it apart like all the others, he did something different. He reached out with one paw and pressed it gently into the soft fabric. His claws came out just a little bit, and he kneaded the pillow the way earth cats did when they were happy and content. Minji felt her breath catch in her throat. It was working. He wasn't destroying it. He was accepting it. The other 2 cubs stood up and came over. The smallest one, the gray-spotted female, pressed her face against the pillow and breathed in deeply. The middle cub, darker gray with white paws, walked around it in a circle, examining it from every angle. Then, all together, the 3 cubs lay down around the pillow. They pressed their small bodies against it and against each other, forming a tight ball of fur. The biggest cub put his head on the pillow and let out a long, deep breath, and then, for the first time since they had come aboard, one of them made a new sound. Not crying, not hissing, purring, soft and gentle like a tiny motor running. Minji felt tears running down her face. She hadn't even realized she was crying. The sound was so beautiful, so full of relief and comfort. The other cubs started purring too, all 3 of them together creating a soft harmony. But they still looked tense, still looked scared. They were better, but not completely okay. Minji knew what she had to do. She moved closer, very slowly, until she was sitting right beside them. She reached out one hand and gently touched the biggest cub's head. He opened one eye and looked at her, but he didn't move away. She stroked his soft fur, feeling how dirty and matted it was from days without proper care. "I'm here," she said quietly. "You're not alone. I know I'm not your mother. I know I'm not even the same as you, but I'm here and I'm not going anywhere." The cub closed his eye and pushed his head harder against her hand. The smallest cub crawled closer and pressed herself against Minji's leg. The middle one moved until he was touching her other side, and just like that, Minji became part of their nest. She sat there on the cold cargo bay floor, with 3 alien children pressed against her, and she knew she couldn't leave them. Not tonight. Maybe not any night until they reached the Valrine station. She carefully lay down on the floor beside the pillow. It was uncomfortable and cold, and her back would hurt in the morning, but she didn't care. The cubs immediately rearranged themselves, using both her and the pillow as their safe space. The smallest one actually climbed onto Minji's stomach and curled up there, her tiny body rising and falling with each breath Minji took. The cargo bay was silent except for purring. All 3 cubs had finally relaxed. Their breathing slowed down and became deep and steady. They were falling asleep, really asleep, for the first time since the rescue. Minji stroked their soft fur and stared up at the ceiling. Her pillow was already getting torn a little bit where their claws touched it, but she didn't mind. If her pillow could give these babies one night of peace and safety, it was worth it. If sleeping on a hard floor could help them feel less alone, she would do it every night. She thought about her mother and those old Korean songs. She couldn't remember all the words anymore, but she remembered the melody. Very softly, so quiet it was almost just breathing, she started to hum. The cubs' purring changed rhythm, matching the song somehow. Their small bodies relaxed even more. The smallest one, still on Minji's stomach, made a little squeaking sound in her sleep. Minji smiled and kept humming. Outside the cargo bay, the ship moved through space, carrying them all toward the Valrine station. But inside this room there was warmth and safety. There was comfort and trust. There was something that looked a lot like family, even if it was the strangest family anyone had ever seen. When Juan came to check on her an hour later, he found her asleep on the floor, covered in alien cubs with a smile on her face. He started to wake her up, then stopped. He took a picture instead, then quietly left the room and sealed the door. Some things, he thought, were more important than protocol or comfort or even common sense. Sometimes, the right thing to do was just to be there for someone who needed you, no matter how different they were or how hard it might be. That was what being human really meant. Everything changed after that night. The cubs stopped destroying things and started living instead. Minji woke up the next morning with her back aching and her legs numb from lying on the hard floor. The 3 cubs were still pressed against her, warm and soft. When she tried to move, the smallest one opened her eyes and made a questioning chirp. "Good morning," Minji said, her voice scratchy from sleep. "Are you hungry?" The cub tilted her head, not understanding the words but recognizing the gentle tone. She stood up and stretched, her little back arching just like an earth cat. The other 2 cubs woke up more slowly, yawning to show their tiny, sharp teeth. Minji sat up carefully, and immediately the cubs crowded around her. They rubbed their faces against her arms and hands, making soft purring sounds. She laughed and petted each of them in turn. Okay. Let me get up and I'll find you some breakfast." She had researched Valrine cubs' diets the day before. They could eat a special protein paste that the ship's food maker could produce. It wasn't what they would normally eat, but it would keep them healthy until they reached the station. When she stood up, all 3 cubs followed her. They stayed close, almost tripping her as she walked. It took twice as long as normal to get to the food preparation area because she had to keep stopping so they wouldn't get stepped on. Juan and Deho were already in the common area, drinking coffee and looking at the day's schedule. They both stared when Minji came in with 3 cubs trailing behind her like a small parade. "They're following you," Deho said, stating the obvious. "I noticed," Minji replied. She went to the food maker and programmed it for the protein paste. The machine hummed and produced 3 small bowls of pale gray food that looked terrible, but supposedly tasted good to Valrine. She put the bowls on the floor. The cubs sniffed them suspiciously at first, but then hunger won and they started eating. They ate quickly and messily, getting food on their faces and paws. When they were done, they all looked up at Minji and chirped, their mouths still dirty. She couldn't help but laugh. "You 3 are a disaster. Come here." She got a wet cloth and cleaned their faces while they squirmed and complained. It reminded her of taking care of her younger cousins when they were little, except these cousins had fur and tails and weren't human at all. That became the new routine. Every day, Minji took care of the cubs. She fed them 3 times a day. She cleaned them when they got dirty. She played with them when they had too much energy. And every night she slept in the cargo bay with them, using her torn and re-sewn pillow as their shared nest. Daiho and Juan helped when they could. Daiho created toys for the cubs using spare parts and string. They loved chasing things that moved, and they could play for hours with a piece of ribbon tied to a stick. Juan built them a climbing structure from cargo containers, and the cubs spent half their day jumping and climbing and practicing their hunting skills on imaginary prey. But it was Minji they always came back to. Minji they cried for when they were scared. Minji they followed around the ship like small shadows. She started teaching them words, simple things in Korean, because that was easier for her than trying to learn the Valrine language. Babi meant food. Mul meant water. Jaja meant sleep time. They picked up the words surprisingly fast, their small voices trying to copy the sound she made. It came out wrong and funny, but she praised them every time they tried. She also learned their individual personalities. The biggest cub, who she started calling Kira in her mind, was brave and curious. She was always the first to try new things, the first to explore a new room, the first to approach when something scared them. But she was also the most protective of her siblings, always putting herself between them and any perceived danger. The middle cub, who she thought of as Nalo, was gentle and thoughtful. He liked to sit and watch things for a long time before he acted. He was the best at learning new words, and he would practice them over and over until he got them right. He also loved being petted and would push his head under Minji's hand whenever she sat down. The smallest cub, Tess in Minji's mind, was playful and affectionate. She was always the first to purr, the first to climb into Minji's lap, the first to give little head bumps when she wanted attention, but she was also the most easily frightened, and would hide behind Minji's legs whenever something startled her. Word about the rescue spread through the shipping networks. Other vessels in the sector started sending messages, offering advice and supplies. A mining ship 3 days away sent over some special Valrine comfort items through a cargo drone. A medical transport shared information about cub health that wasn't in the standard databases. One captain, an older woman named Commander Terry who ran a military escort ship, sent a message that made Minji cry. "What you're doing is important," the message said. "Not just for those cubs, but for all of us. You're showing everyone that different species can take care of each other, that family doesn't have to be about biology. Keep going. You're doing great." But it wasn't always easy. Some days the cubs were cranky and difficult. They would fight with each other over toys or food. They would refuse to sleep even though they were clearly exhausted. They would make messes that took hours to clean up, and Minji was tired. So tired. She wasn't getting enough sleep on the hard cargo bay floor. Her back hurt all the time. She was behind on her regular work because caring for the cubs took so much time and energy. She snapped at Juan once over something small, then felt terrible about it for days. But every night when she lay down on that floor and felt 3 warm bodies press against her, she knew it was worth it. Every time she heard them purr, every time they called her with their version of her name that sounded like Minzi, every time they looked at her with trust in their golden eyes, she knew she was exactly where she was supposed to be. 2 weeks into the journey, something wonderful happened. Minji was doing maintenance work in the control room while the cubs played nearby with Diho's ribbon toy. Tess caught the ribbon in her paws and looked so proud of herself. Then she turned to Minji and said very clearly, "Minji, look!" Minji dropped her tools. The cubs had been making sounds that were close to words for days now, but this was different. This was a real sentence, a real attempt at communication beyond just need and emotion. "I'm looking," Minji said, her voice shaking with excitement. "You caught it. Good job, Tess." Tess purred so loud it sounded like thunder. Kira and Nalo came running over to see what the fuss was about. When Minji explained that Tess had spoken words, they both wanted to try too. "Minzi good," Kira said carefully. "Play more," Nalo added, pointing at the ribbon. Minji sat down on the floor and gathered all 3 cubs into her arms. They were getting bigger now, growing every day on the protein paste and all the care. Soon they would be too big to all fit in her lap at once, but right now they still fit perfectly. "You're all so smart," she told them, knowing they understood more from her tone than her words. "I'm so proud of you." She was also heartbroken, because in 5 more days they would reach the Valrine station, and then she would have to give them to their own people and say goodbye. The cubs didn't know that yet. They thought this was permanent. They thought Minzi was theirs forever. Minji pushed those thoughts away and focused on the present moment. 5 more days of this strange, wonderful family. 5 more days of purring and playing and soft fur under her hands. 5 more days before everything changed. She would make every moment count. The Valrine colony station Epsilon appeared on their screens like a small city floating in space. It was huge and beautiful, all smooth white surfaces and elegant curves. Minji stood in the control room and stared at it, her heart feeling heavy in her chest. 5 days had passed too quickly. Now the moment she had been dreading was finally here. The cubs were playing in the cargo bay, unaware of what was coming. They had grown so much in the past 2 weeks. Their fur was clean and shiny now. They were stronger, healthier, happier. They laughed and played like normal children should. But they still followed Minji everywhere. They still called her Minzi. They still thought she was theirs. "Station control is requesting permission to dock," Diho said quietly. He looked sad too. Over the past weeks, he had become attached to the cubs just like everyone else. Even Juan, who had been so angry about his destroyed sleeping bag, now spent his evenings making toys for them. "Permission granted," Minji said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. The docking process took 20 minutes, 20 more minutes with her strange little family. Minji went to the cargo bay and found all 3 cubs playing with a ball Diho had made. They ran to her immediately when she came in, purring and rubbing against her legs. "Minzi," Tess said happily. "Play with us!" Minji sat down and pulled all three cubs close. "I need to tell you something important," she said. They probably wouldn't understand all the words, but they would understand that something was wrong from her tone. "We're at the Valrine station now. There are other Valrine here, your own people. They're going to take care of you." Kira's ears went flat. She was the smartest, the one who picked up on things fastest. "No," she said firmly. "Stay with Minji." "I can't come with you," Minji said, her throat tight. "You need to be with your own kind. They'll teach you things I can't teach you. They'll help you grow up properly." "No," Nalo said, pressing himself against her side. "Minji is ours." Tess started crying, that same heartbreaking sound from the first days. "Don't leave. Please don't leave." Minji was crying too now. She hugged them all as tight as she could. "I don't want to leave you, but this is what's best for you. I promise." The docking clamps connected with a loud clang. A message came through the communication system. "Captain Minji, the Valrine delegation is ready to board." Minji wiped her eyes and stood up. The cubs clung to her legs, making it hard to walk. She had to practically drag them as she made her way to the docking bay where Juan and Deho were already waiting. The airlock opened and 4 adult Valrine walked in. They were tall and elegant, with sleek fur in various shades of gray and silver. They moved with grace and calm confidence. The one in front, an older female with white patches in her fur, bowed slightly. "Captain Minji, I am Thessa, head caretaker of the station's youth facility. We are grateful for your rescue of these cubs." "It was the right thing to do," Minji said simply. Thessa looked down at the 3 cubs who were hiding behind Minji's legs. "I see they have bonded with you. This is unusual for our kind. Valrine cubs typically do not show such strong attachment behaviors." "They've been through a lot," Minji said defensively. "They needed someone." Indeed. Thessa knelt down and tried to approach the cubs. She made soft clicking sounds that must have been soothing in the Valrine language. But Kira hissed at her, and all 3 cubs pressed even harder against Minji. Thessa stood back up, looking thoughtful. "This is more complicated than we anticipated. These cubs have imprinted on you in a way that goes beyond normal caretaker bonds. Forcing them to separate now could cause psychological damage." Minji felt hope flare in her chest, then immediately felt guilty. She couldn't keep them. They weren't hers. They needed to be with their own people. "What are you suggesting?" "Our species approaches child-rearing with logic and efficiency," Thessa said slowly. "We do not often display the kind of physical affection and emotional bonding that you humans seem to practice naturally. But I am beginning to think that is a mistake, at least for cubs who have experienced trauma." She looked at Minji with her large golden eyes. "Would you consider staying at the station for a transition period? Perhaps a few weeks? You could help the cubs adjust to their new environment and teach our caretakers about your methods. We could learn from each other." Minji looked at her crew. Juan and Deho both nodded immediately. "We can handle the cargo delivery," Deho said. "Some things are more important than schedules." "Are you sure?" Minji asked them. "It means more delays." "More lost money," Juan smiled. "Look at them, Captain. Look at how much they need you. How can we say no to that?" Minji turned back to Thessa. "I'll stay, for as long as they need me." The next 3 weeks were strange and wonderful. The Valrine station was like nothing Minji had ever seen. Everything was clean and organized and efficient. The cubs were given a beautiful room with proper sleeping nests and all the equipment they needed. But they refused to sleep there unless Minji slept there too. So Minji moved into the youth facility, sharing the room with 3 alien children while adult Valrine watched and learned. She showed them how to comfort the cubs with physical touch, how to play games that weren't just educational but also fun, how to read emotions through body language and sounds. The Valrine caretakers were quick learners. They began incorporating these new methods with all the cubs in their care, not just Kira, Nalo, and Tess. The results were remarkable. Cubs who had been quiet and withdrawn started playing and laughing. The whole facility felt warmer somehow. Slowly, very slowly, the 3 cubs started accepting other Valrine into their circle. First one young caretaker named Vess, who was patient and gentle. Then an older cub named Rowan, who became their friend. Then others, one by one, until they had a whole community around them. But they still loved Minji best. Every night she was there, they slept in their nest with her in the middle. Every morning they woke up and looked for her first. Every time they learned something new, they wanted to show Minji. 3 weeks turned into 4, then 5. Minji knew she had to leave eventually. The stellar wind was waiting, and Juan and Daiho had been patient long enough. But every time she tried to say goodbye, one of the cubs would do something that made her heart break, and she would stay another day. Finally, Thessa came to her in the evening after the cubs were asleep. "It is time," she said gently. "They are ready, and you need to return to your life." "How do you know they're ready?" Minji asked. "Watch them. They play with other cubs now. They seek comfort from our caretakers when you are not around. They are learning our language and our ways. They are still different from other Valrine cubs, but that is not a bad thing. They have taught us all so much about the value of emotional connection." Thessa paused, then added, "They will always love you. They will always remember you. But they will be okay without you now. That is what good parenting means, human or Valrine. Teaching your children to be strong enough to thrive even when you are gone." Minji knew she was right. But knowing it and accepting it were two different things. The next morning, she sat down with all three cubs and told them the truth. She was leaving that day. She had to go back to her ship and her work. But she would never forget them, and they would always be in her heart. Kira was the first to speak. She was bigger now, almost up to Minji's waist. Her voice was stronger and clearer. "We understand, Minji. You saved us. You took care of us. You gave us your pillow when we had nothing. You taught us we could be safe again," Nalo added. "That we could trust and love again." Tess climbed into Minji's lap one last time. "Will you come back and visit?" "I'll try," Minji promised, even though she didn't know if she could. Space was big and travel was expensive and life was unpredictable. "But even if I can't, you'll always be mine. My brave cubs. My first children, even if you're not human." The cubs had prepared something for her. Kira brought out a package wrapped in soft cloth. "Open it," she said. Inside was a piece of Minji's original pillow, the one they had slept on that first night. The Valrine artisans had preserved it somehow and put it in a beautiful frame made of crystal. Underneath, written in both Korean and Valrine script, were the words, "For Minji, who gave us everything." Even her pillow, Minji held it and cried. The cubs pressed against her, purring, offering comfort the way she had taught them. They stayed like that for a long time, one human and three Valrine. One last moment of being a family. When Minji finally walked back to the stellar wind, she was crying but also smiling. Juan and Daiho were waiting for her in the docking bay. They didn't say anything, just hugged her and let her cry on their shoulders. As the ship pulled away from the station, Minji looked out the window. She couldn't see the cubs from here, but she knew they were down there, safe and loved and surrounded by their own people. They would grow up strong. They would have good lives. And they would always remember the human who slept. Her communicator beeped. A message from the Valrine Council. She read it aloud to her crew. "The Valrine High Council wishes to thank Captain Minji for her extraordinary service. We propose a permanent cultural exchange program between our species. Humans will teach emotional intelligence and nurturing practices. Valrine will share advanced scientific knowledge. We are calling this initiative the Pillow Accord in honor of the act of sacrifice that began the